This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is Kimberly Black King, the Chief of Real Estate Development at Volunteers of America, one of the nation's largest developers and owners of affordable housing. Kimberly joined the VOA after 20 years in the affordable housing industry, which included her time as the Chief Development Officer at the D.C. Housing Authority, the Director of the Corporation for Supportive Housing's Mid-Atlantic office, and as a Senior Account Executive at Fannie Mae. Kimberly, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Katie. It's a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for making the time, and we have a lot of information I want to cover here about you, about Volunteers of America, and let's just start with how you got involved at Volunteers of America and really maybe talk about your onboarding within affordable housing.
Yeah, happy to. It's been a really interesting journey, and like many of my peers in this space, I actually landed here, by my good luck and fortune. I was planning to be a CPA, and really focused on a nice, solid career that would really be more of a means to an end. Is how I looked at it, to provide, a nice quality of life. And so I'm really extremely grateful to know that something otherwise exists, because this is work that I find really, really rewarding. Fell into this world when a friend who was then the controller for a developer contacted me about a development accountant position. And that was my first random introduction to community development at McCormick Barron Salzar. When I went to McCormick Barron, I was just fascinated by the work that was happening, and pretty quickly moved away from accounting into a project management role, working on redevelopments of public housing sites through HUD's Hope 6 program, which, as you know, Katie, was one of HUD's initiatives to eradicate severely depressed and distressed, disinvested public housing sites. So I jumped around and learned as much as I could, jumping around in those projects at various stages. But my first project that I started at the concept stage was Arthur Blumeyer, which is now redeveloped as Renaissance Place, which has been done by McCormick Barron Salzar in partnership with the St. Louis Housing Authority. That project was, not unlike other Hope Sixes throughout the country, was just an enormous undertaking and required a lot of stakeholder engagement and partnership to really realize what that community could be, well beyond the focus on the bricks and mortar. And so through those community partnerships, we really wove together the adjacent sectors, including education, healthcare, employment, business sectors, and started working on the steering committee and really doing a deeper dive to what success would look like. And there's plenty of work for us to do all day long, just building affordable housing. But having that opportunity to connect the sectors and that overall sort of continuum, and really take a stab at addressing some of those more systemic changes that are necessary in these communities, was really powerful to me personally. I thought just really dynamic space to be in. And so it was really there. And at that time, and I can vividly remember it as if it were yesterday, at the beginning of that Arthur Blumeyer redevelopment, and working with the residents there and learning so much from the residents, and what their vision was for the project, and their desires, and all of the elements that were involved in that. And I knew that this work was really my calling. And I've been, very intentional and deliberate about the professional roles that I've taken on since then, and making sure that they really align with my desire for overall impact. It's very important to me. And so fast forwarding a bit, I came to DC as you mentioned, in recapping my resume, initially with a position with Fannie Mae to help expand their special affordable housing debt platform, and then went on to work for CSH in opening their Mid Atlantic office and did a lot of localized work in the district and really enjoyed that work in the district. Actually, really fortunate as well to still be working on some projects in my current role in the district. But the opportunity at Volunteers of America National Services was really attractive because it allowed me to return to a more national footprint with an organization with really deep reach. And so now here I sit at Volunteers of America and have oversight of our affordable housing portfolio, as well as I'm currently serving as the interim chief operating officer, which pulls in oversight of our healthcare senior living portfolio as well.
Before we move on to Volunteers of America, I actually remember Hope Six back in the day, and I worked on several of those way back. And I loved the before and afters, but Hope Six was so unique because it was on that maturity cycle of Hope Six, Choice Neighborhoods, now RAD. And it's
Mhm.
been a great journey for redevelopment and repositioning of assets. I think that now, when you look at what VOA and housing authorities are able to do, they have so many more tools by which they can do that. That now leads me to this national footprint you're talking about with VOA. What are some of your strategic development goals as an organization? Because you guys are really changing up who you are in the development space.
I'll take a step back to provide some overall context for how we're set up. Our parent organization is Volunteers of America Incorporated, which is a national nonprofit, faith based nonprofit that has 30 affiliates. 29 of those affiliates are locally based with their own bylaws, charter, their own board for their geographic footprint at the local level. So you may see those as VOA Florida. Here, covering the DC area, we have our VOA Chesapeake and Carolinas that covers the DMV as well as South and North Carolina. And so they are confined to that footprint. And they have a host of services, programs, and products that they deliver. Volunteers of America National Services, where I sit, is an affiliate of VOA that has a national footprint. We have two lines of business, and that's our healthcare senior living portfolio and our affordable housing portfolio. So we are fortunate in that we get to do work throughout the country. And we are in just about 40 states, the district in Puerto Rico, and we get to partner with our local affiliates as well. So it's really an interesting opportunity. As we think about our strategic placement, we are really looking at how we can impact some of that disparity more intentionally through our partnerships. One is broadband access to and making sure that we have a way to serve our seniors as technology grows and changes the way that seniors interact with healthcare. We saw this magnified during COVID when some of our communities in lower income residents didn't have that sort of access. And we were focused on that before. We actually did a partnered with AARP to do a demonstration across some of our projects in Colorado, where we dropped Alexas in our senior units to address social isolation. And again, this was about a year and a half before COVID. We were really thinking about using it in two ways: addressing social isolation, which can lead to a adverse health outcomes, as well as thinking about how do we program our buildings where technology is moving super fast at lightning speed, and our development compared to technology moves at a snail's pace. So by the time we go through our pre-development and closing, it's a 5 or 6 year process, and we're seeing much newer technology. So how do we make our buildings think forward and make our buildings respond as sort of smart buildings, if you will? So really focused on technology is one of our strategic focuses, and the healthcare outcome. So the other side of our house, where we are providing senior living through assisted living facilities, memory care, skilled nursing facilities, we are really taking some of that expertise and thinking at concept phase on our affordable housing side, what is a healthcare goal that we can create through this project? And we know that housing is healthcare. So going one step beyond that, initially we started with, let's make sure that we have that broadband access throughout our entire building and not just the common areas. So it can be something like that, and to something much larger like a healthcare provider that has dedicated space or satellite space that is actually incorporated into our building. So really being intentional about pairing the healthcare outcome with our affordable housing is a huge initiative of ours.
So, has that always been part of the offerings that you guys have done, both the outcome or life driven healthcare component, and then additionally providing housing and a redevelopment? Has that always been there, or is that something you guys have just sort of like grown into, so to speak, as an organization?
It's been there by coincidence. So we would do our great work, and then we'd say, oh, like, wow, look at what we accomplished. And so now, having that intentionality behind it is literally part of our strategic plan. Our strategic plan that we most recently adopted, our number one aspirational goal is innovation around housing and healthcare. And that led us to our second goal, which is creating well being for both our residents and our staff. And thirdly, how that requires for us to think about partnerships differently. On the housing side, we think about a partner as Wells Fargo or Bank of America, Citibank, Lument, those that we do our development transactions with on our debt and equity side. Those commonly come to mind. My example with AARP didn't come to mind as organically or naturally, but now it does after we did the initiative. So the work was there, but now we are making sure that it's consistently there with that intentionality that I mentioned.
Before we move on to the development pieces, you said your strategic plan, the first one was innovation around housing and healthcare. You've mentioned AARP, memory care, broadband. What are some of the other examples of services that you're doing as part of your affordable housing offering?
So one of our, I'll call it one of our hallmarks is our resident coordinators that are in our buildings. We have about 75% of our portfolio is senior housing. In our senior housing, which really started with our first project that we did in our first federally funded project, which was in 1964 under HUD's 202 program. And so that's the program we really grew up on. We have resident coordinators in about 160 of those sites out of 230-ish. And that coordinator is essential. We find that in both our affordable projects and the sort of the market rate, we've got mixed income housing now. So in the market rate, all use the service coordinator. So we have a 91% participation rate where we have our service coordinator. People are engaging that service, and they really serve as a broker to the various stage services that the residents need. And there's a huge variation of what that can be. I don't know if you've ever been through a process where you have perhaps a parent who is a veteran and is entitled to or eligible for services. The amount of paperwork, the number of phone calls, it is a really daunting process for people who have access to resources, lots of resources to even go through that process. The number of people that don't even know, aren't aware of the resources that are out there, and benefit from being connected to those sort of resources and having some help to go through it is really important. And it can be transformational in terms of quality of life. It can be the difference between getting services and not getting services and the domino effect of that.
You said that 75% of your portfolios are serving seniors. About how many people are we talking about?
So in our Vones portfolio, so we have a roll up for all of our VOA affiliates, and that is number of properties. That's about 500 properties, about 23,000 units. That number represents our total portfolio for Volunteers of America. Vones has about 236, where we own, Vones solely owns 236 properties. It's about 14,000 units. And we are serving through our resident coordinators about 10,000 people,
Wow,
residents.
that's amazing. How's the participation like with the service coordinators?
So that's the 91%, about 91% where we have coordinators in our buildings. It's the participation rate is 91% of those are engaging with the service coordinator.
That seems incredibly high to me when you have that much participation with your residents. How are you getting such a high level there?
Well, I so they are on site. That's one. So it's not like a part-time position where they, are there 1 day a week or 4 hours a week. So they are there and they are regularly engaging. They are, again, the services that they provide can range from um, yoga, senior yoga programming at the site, to partnering with providers that are external providers that we partner with outside the community. And again, in some cases, where we may have a provider coming in to the site to actually serve and do perhaps wellness checks and things like that. That, again, is one of the things that we're being very intentional about. We're wrapping up, by way of example, we're wrapping up construction on four rehab projects in Miami. And each are about 100 units of high rise senior housing and very little community space in these buildings. And they're 8-story concrete buildings. We identified a space on the second floor across from the elevator that we could build out as a provider room. So we have this wonderful provider space that is, it really could accommodate a part-time physician. So it has an exam room, it has a restroom, it has a waiting area, and that will house a service provider to come in and do wellness checks for our residents. And so that's one way that they can, in those particular examples, engage with our resident coordinator. So it's really about being present. It's about understanding what your community needs. We do annual surveys to determine what our residents want. And this is paired very closely with property management. So our property management is performed by our affiliate, where we have a local affiliate. And the projects that I just mentioned, the example with Miami, those projects are property management is performed by Volunteers of America, Florida. And they have an excellent property management outfit. And the resident coordinators are actually staffed by our property manager. They are supported by our resident services team that we have here at Volunteers of America National Services. So they provide them with sort of the technical support and all of that. But the resident coordinators themselves are on the site every day with project property management, working very closely with them to make sure that they are responding to the actual needs of the residents and that particular community, which varies from community to community, and that is helping us achieve those high outcomes like 91% versus just going in there with a sort of cookie cutter menu of services. We're not doing that. We're really capturing what is needed in response to the communities. Some of our communities in Miami, where these Sweetwater and Hialeah cities in Miami, where these properties are located, there's 98% of that population is Spanish speaking. And so English is not their first language. That may differ from, what our senior project in Boulder City, Colorado needs. So we really do respond to the community needs based on the characteristics and population that we have there.
Last year, Vones appeared on the annual Affordable Housing Finance list with over $250 million in development costs and just over 800 units under construction throughout the year. Where are these units and how are they coming along in the development pipeline?
So we are really, really proud. And the team, I am fortunate to work with some of the best. And they are steadfast, dedicated every single day. And what impresses me most about this is that these are projects that were in the pre development phase in the thick of COVID. We continue to move these projects through and achieve a groundbreaking and start construction, close on our financing, despite all of the challenges that we saw. And that was enormous. I mean, it was huge. So I'm really proud of that. Our pipeline and our number of units, it can be misleading because, as I mentioned, if you roll up Volunteers of America, our entire a family of affiliates, that's 500 projects. And VONES, Volunteers of America National Services, we refer to ourselves as VONES. We are the entity that is charged with repositioning that and preservation of our existing portfolio for the VOA family. So at any given time, our portfolio, our pipeline will represent probably half of transactions that are related to preservation for our existing portfolio. And the reason that skews the numbers for us is because, as I mentioned earlier, having grown up on the 202 program, it is more of those are smaller projects. I'd say an average size is 40 to 50 units. So we could do 10 transactions and that can represent 500 or 600 units. The newer transactions that we're doing are larger tax credit transactions for the most part, tax credit transactions. That was represented in our 2022 numbers as well. All of those projects are moving forward. They are primarily in our key strategic markets, which includes Texas, a very exciting project in Texas. The Oaks, it's in partnership with the Dallas Housing Authority. It was originally Brooks Manor, a public housing site that was demolished in 2015. We partnered with the Housing Authority to redevelop the site. It is about 70% complete now. 260 units of senior housing to our healthcare initiative, about 5,500 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor that will house a healthcare provider to serve the residents and the larger community around the Oaks. So that's really exciting. That we'll have a ribbon cutting later this year for that project. We've got projects in Colorado, in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Durango that were included in that pipeline as well. I mentioned Florida earlier, and we have a project in North Carolina, Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. So we're really excited about all of those projects and the future as well. Really focused on Puerto Rico, where we acquired 10 properties totaling 455 units, as well as a property management company. So it's the first time that we've acquired a property management company, but we're really making the investment in Puerto Rico because we tend to go where there is the highest and greatest need. And there's been so much devastation and housing lost on the island. And the area median income is so low. And it really warrants partnership with the island and leadership to figure out how we can rebuild some of that lost housing and improve the infrastructure. So to protect that housing going forward. So we're focused on that as well, although that was not included in our 2022 numbers. But I thought I'd just add that, Katie.
Of the 455 units that you just mentioned there in Puerto Rico, is that family or is that senior?
That's family housing.
So, is that a unique trend for you? You've done senior a lot, we've talked about. Do you see it that was just the opportunity for that particular area, or is that something regarding family housing that you see yourselves moving into?
That is a great question, Katie. We evaluate the opportunities as they come. We have talked a lot internally about our expertise around senior housing and if that should be our primary focus. We haven't landed there. I don't see us landing there in the near term, but it is a question because so much of our portfolio is senior. And we actually did have this conversation when we were acquiring the Puerto Rico sites. And for Puerto Rico, that decision was driven by being in a place that really needs the investment and a place that we determined to check the box for us in going to some of the more difficult places to serve. And so here are some examples that make that portfolio extremely challenging. One, it's an island. So it can be more expensive to build there. Yet, when we think about keeping units affordable, and that means higher, more equity, less debt, there's more need to cover secure subsidy, soft financing that can cover those costs that are likely to be escalated. There's also an escalation around insurance. As we see these, and we're seeing this across the industry now, where in response to so many natural disasters more frequently, the insurance on both our capital side and our operating side are much higher. And we are seeing ranges of 30 to 50% higher in our premiums. That is common. And so that becomes more expensive when you look at some of those areas that have been more frequently struck by not natural disasters like a Puerto Rico or Florida. And also the workforce dynamic, where we have the area median income that is in the lower 20,000s. So that is, again, makes it harder for those numbers to work. But we think that if not us, then who? So we really are focused on those transactions to reach the deepest part of our mission.
I like how you said that, if not us, but who. That's a great segue because with all of this acquisition and redevelopment activity you're doing, sounds like you're going to have a lot of ribbon cuttings this year.
We sure hope so.
So I have another question. Just that you've mentioned tax credit, you mentioned CDBG at certain points that I'm assuming you're using. What are you finding is the maybe the best applicable financing tool for you guys, or do you have a set model, or do you just kind of go after whatever's there?
We like all affordable housing developers, we are always in search of covering the gap. I haven't seen a project in a long time that didn't have a gap. So we go after a lot of different funding. But I can tell you what has been incredibly important to us over the last couple of years, and that is the Capital Magnet Fund program. We have been fortunate to receive, through the competitive application process, capital magnet funds. I think we're at over probably around 25 million with 4 or 5 grants, where we've been successful as an applicant in their NOFA rounds. And that funding was critical to closing gaps on our projects last year. By way of example, we headed into the summer. It was around May, June of 2022 last year. And we were projecting to close 3 projects. And those 3 projects collectively had an $8 million budget bust through a combination of what we were seeing, the volatility in the market around interest rate increases, construction costs, insurance premiums, etc. And we used our capital magnet funds to, and other sources, but our capital magnet funds was a really critical component to realize the financial closing for those projects. We've been really grateful for, and I think that that program is hugely important as a real asset to affordable housing development.
There are many pieces of this job that, like you've been around for a couple of decades, we get wrapped up in compliance, we get wrapped up in very transactional phases of what we're doing as housing providers. But take a step here and tell us what you personally and professionally attach to the most as an affordable housing provider.
So for me, that is affordable housing is something I think we should all have. Whatever affordability is for us as as individuals or families. And I think it is nearly impossible to focus on other things, those other important core basic needs, without decent, sound, affordable housing. The difference that that can make is very powerful. And that does drive me personally. What a luxury to have the choice. We had a retreat in November, among the Vones team, and program leads. And I shared this story with them. One of my colleagues at Volunteers of America, who runs the development in Minnesota, which is a key market for us, we were visiting. He was showing me a few sites in Minnesota, and he was talking so proudly about his family and his choice to live in a particular area in a lovely house with his beautiful wife Rachel and their son Charlie. And we actually stopped by his house, of course, and popped in on his wife. And she's out there in the garden, and she's like, "Oh, hey!" And he just had such pride and joy. That was a year and a half ago, I think. And I think about it so often because I think everybody should have that sort of pride and joy by choice and that option. And it just makes such a difference. Me personally, my parents worked very, very hard to afford a nice home in a nice community so that me and my siblings could have a great education. And they had to really work hard for that. My mother, who I have a lot of connections with this in my industry, and on the other side where I'm overseeing healthcare, my mother was a nurse for nearly 50 years. And she also worked in a skilled nursing facility after she retired from a hospital. And at some point, she worked two jobs to make sure that we were well cared for and she could afford the community that we lived in, which wasn't necessarily affordable. And, so that meant sacrifices, time with her family, time to be away from her family, to be able to provide that. And so I feel like personally and professionally, Katie, it is certainly an honor and a duty that I serve in this capacity to sort of help pay it forward. And that is really how I view it. And the work couldn't be more important to me. I would do it over and over and over again in any community in the world, actually, that needs investment and has suffered from, disinvestment over years. The domino effect of that, it can be very crippling. And I think that any opportunity that we have to address that personally and professionally, by personally, I mean through our community and volunteer work, I encourage people to take that.
Well, it's interesting because not a lot of seniors have the ability or the economic means to really set aside and prepare for certain phases of their life because they're so busy trying to get through life. And so the crucial need for affordable housing for particularly seniors is so evident when you look at the statistics of rent burdens or access to housing. And then when you pair it with what you guys are doing, providing health tools and integration and all these other pieces, it really does set up a platform to pay it forward, like you mentioned. And What a need that you guys are helping solve.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and I oftentimes reflect on where I'm at, and the seat that I sit in now, and again how fortunate and privileged and what an honor it is on the healthcare side, where we are providing quality healthcare to seniors who many of them haven't had the opportunity to plan, as you mentioned, Katie, and again, shouldn't everybody have access to quality health care when they're no longer able to stay in their homes and they come to a facility? I certainly think so. And so, again, it actually amazes me the opportunity to have in one organization focus on affordable housing as well as the care that we provide through our senior living portfolio.
Well, at Quadell, we've worked with you guys several times over the years, and we are all standing right there with you saying, grow, 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 build, 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 renovate, and keep on going. So we're glad to have you in this spectrum of providing affordable housing for seniors, families, whatever ventured path you guys go down.
Well, thank you, Katie. We certainly appreciate your partnership. This space is, there's so much need, so much work. Partnerships like yours and Quadell, and the information through this podcast that you're getting out to the public is just so appreciated. So we are grateful for your partnership and look for ways to expand and build on it.
Well, you are welcome. We've been talking with Kimberly Black King, the Chief of Real Estate Development at Volunteers of America. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you, Katie. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadell.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.